was a freezing winter night, the kind of night when the world feels wrapped in silence and ice. The wind howled through the narrow mountain roads, shaking the trees and pushing against everything that dared to stand still. The sky was bruised, gray, heavy with snow that fell endlessly, coating the world in white. Out on that lonely stretch of road, 15 bikers rode through the storm, their headlights flickering through the blizzard like distant stars fighting the dark. They were part of a motorcycle club, not the kind that looked for trouble, but the kind that chased open skies and freedom. They had set out early that morning, full of energy and laughter, not realizing how quickly the weather would turn against them. By nightfall, the storm was merciless. Visibility was near zero, the road was slick with ice, and the cold bit through their gloves and jackets like tiny knives. One of the bikes skidded on a patch of frozen snow, and the rider barely managed to steady it. The men exchanged worried glances. They needed shelter. Fast. For miles, there was nothing. No houses, no gas stations, just endless white and the sound of engines struggling against the wind. Then through the curtain of snow, one of them spotted a faint light glowing from a small wooden house by the road. It was an old weathered cottage, its chimney puffing smoke into the freezing air. They hesitated at first. It was late, past midnight, and they didn't want to disturb anyone. But the storm wasn't letting up, and the temperature was dropping by the minute. They parked their bikes in the driveway, their boots crunching in the snow as they approached the door. One of them knocked gently. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing an elderly woman wrapped in a shawl, her face lined with years but her eyes warm and calm. She looked at them, 15 rugged bikers, faces hidden behind helmets and scarves, shivering from the cold, and without a second's thought, she said, "Come in, boys, you must be freezing." The warmth from inside hit them like sunlight. The room was small but cozy. Wooden walls, a fireplace crackling, a pot of soup simmering on the stove. The woman introduced herself as Margaret, though everyone in the nearby village called her Maggie. She lived alone ever since her husband passed away 5 years ago. Her children had moved to the city and visits were rare. The quiet had become her companion. But that night her small cottage was alive again, with laughter, the sound of boots drying by the fire and the steam of hot soup filling the air. She didn't ask many questions. She just moved around the kitchen with gentle urgency, ladling soup into bowls, bringing out bread, and making sure everyone had a blanket. The bikers, though tough and tattooed, were suddenly like children, grateful, humbled, and a little shy. They tried to refuse her generosity at first, offering to pay, but she waved them off. "You don't pay for kindness, dear," she said with a smile. The men sat around the fire, thawing their frozen hands. They told her stories about their rides across the country, the sunsets they'd chased, the strangers who had helped them on the road. Maggie listened with a sparkle in her eyes. For the first time in years, her house was filled with life. The laughter echoed against the walls like an old melody she had almost forgotten. As the night deepened, the storm raged harder outside. Snow piled up against the windows, the wind moaned across the roof. But inside the little cottage there was warmth, comfort, and an unspoken sense of family. Some of the bikers dozed off by the fire, others helped clean up the kitchen. Maggie smiled as she watched them, these strangers who had stumbled into her quiet world like a gift from fate. Morning came softly. The storm had passed. The sunlight bounced off the snow, turning the world into a dazzling white sea. Maggie woke early, as she always did, and went to put the kettle on. The house was quiet. She peeked into the living room. The bikers were still asleep, curled up under blankets on the floor and the couch. She smiled, thinking of how life can surprise you in the most unexpected ways. When they finally woke up, they insisted on helping her shovel snow from the driveway. One of them fixed her old wooden fence that had been leaning for months. Another cleaned the chimney. Before leaving, they thanked her over and over again. Maggie just laughed softly and told them to ride safe. They promised to visit again someday. She watched as the 15 bikes started up, their engines rumbling like distant thunder fading into the snowy hills. When the last one disappeared down the road, her house fell silent again. But that silence didn't last long. next morning, Maggie was awakened by a strange sound, a low, steady hum, like distant thunder. She opened her curtains, and what she saw made her heart stop. Lined up outside her house, not 15 but over 100 motorcycles, parked neatly along the road, their chrome glinting in the morning sun. For a moment she thought she was dreaming. Then she opened her door and stepped outside. One by one, the bikers removed their helmets. Different faces, different clubs, men and women of all ages. And at the front, she saw the same 15 who had stayed with her that night. One of them, a tall man with a leather jacket that read, "Road Guardians," stepped forward with a smile. "Morning, Miss Maggie," he said. "We told our friends about what you did for us, about how you took us in without even knowing who we were. So, we thought we'd all come by and say thank you." Tears filled her eyes as she looked at the sea of riders in front of her. Some of them had brought groceries, firewood, and supplies for her house. Others had collected donations to fix her roof and repair her old car. One group even built her a small ramp for easier access to her front porch. The air was full of laughter, the roar of engines, and the kind of joy that can only come from gratitude. Maggie tried to speak, but emotion caught her throat. She simply smiled and said, "I only did what anyone should do." But that wasn't true. Not everyone would have done what she did. In a world where people are often afraid to open their doors, she had chosen compassion over caution. And that one act of kindness had traveled, faster than any engine, louder than any roar, until it reached 100 hearts who came back to return it tenfold. The bikers spent the entire day with her. Some cooked food on portable grills. Others played guitar on her porch, and a few helped her plant new flowers in her frozen garden. The once quiet house was now a place of music and laughter, a symbol of how small actions can ripple into something enormous. As the sun began to set, the road outside her house shimmered with the glow of hundreds of headlights. One by one, the bikers started their engines. The sound was deafening yet strangely beautiful, like an orchestra of gratitude. They revved their bikes in unison, a final salute to the woman who had reminded them all what humanity really means. When they finally rode off, the air was thick with emotion. Maggie stood at her door, watching them disappear into the golden light of the setting sun. She felt something warm in her chest, not just pride or happiness, but a sense of belonging. She realized she wasn't alone anymore. The road had brought her family in the most unexpected form. In the weeks that followed, letters and postcards began arriving at her doorstep. Bikers from all over the country sent her messages, thanking her, telling her how her story inspired them to help others. Some sent photographs from their rides, with little notes like, "For Miss Maggie, the angel of the storm." Local news picked up the story, and soon people started visiting her just to meet the woman who had become a symbol of compassion. But Maggie never saw herself as a hero. She always said the same thing to everyone who came to her door. "It doesn't take much to be kind. Just a warm heart and an open door." And that simple truth became the heart of her legacy. The bikers made it a tradition. Every winter, they rode back to her little cottage to bring supplies and check on her. The first time, there were 100. The next year, there were 200. By the third year, it became an event. The Ride for Maggie. Bikers from across the state gathered to honor the woman whose kindness had sparked a movement. For Maggie, those days became the highlight of her year. She would bake pies, hang little lanterns on her porch, and wait for the sound of engines rolling through the valley. And when they came, hundreds of them, she'd smile, her eyes shining brighter than the snow around her. Years later, when Maggie passed peacefully in her sleep, the bikers came one last time. Thousands of them rode together, engines silent, helmets off, in a quiet procession that stretched for miles. They laid flowers outside her home, now known locally as Maggie's Haven. Someone carved a small sign and hung it on the gate. It read, "Kindness travels faster than any engine." And even after she was gone, her story continued to live on. Retold in biker circles, shared online, whispered in small towns whenever snow began to fall. Parents told it to their children, teachers shared it in classrooms, and strangers who never met her still felt they knew her. because kindness has a way of leaving footprints that never fade. Today, if you drive through that same mountain road in winter, you might still see a lone cottage with a light glowing in the window. And if you stop and listen, you might hear the faint echo of engines, not from the past, but from the hearts she touched. Because in a world that can sometimes feel cold and distant, one woman's warmth reminded us all of something we often forget. You don't need money, fame, or power to change lives. You just need compassion. One act, one moment, one open door,